Rowdynationtv. Welcome back to the channel, guys. Do me a favor, click that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so anytime I drop a video, you guys can be notified. Okay, let's get it. First of all, I like to say happy July 4th to all my listeners and to anybody who might be listening. And I also like to say have a safe July 4th weekend, okay? That's the first thing I like to get off my chest. Have a safe 4th of July weekend, and hopefully we can get through this weekend without any major problems, and I don't have to come back on this channel and report something just some foo-foo, you know what I mean? Hopefully we can just get through this July 4th and like I say, have a safe weekend, guys. Okay, we're gonna get into this article, right? From my city. It's an article from a magazine that's called Westward, and I find it a very interesting article. And if you guys have the time, I wish you would sit back, take the time and listen to this article. It's very interesting. And if you don't, and I know people have things to do, maybe you can stop and you can come back to this article. To this story, because it's very interesting. And it's a pretty lengthy story, and I know some people, a lot of people on the internet are just want to hit real quick and get what they want and go. But if you got the time to listen to the story, please take the time to listen to this story. It's a story about a man that was locked up in ADX Florence maximum security prison. And what he did, he basically snitched his way out of jail. He basically sang his way out of jail. I don't know how you want to put it, but that's what he did. Before we had 6ix9ine, a lot of people calling 6ix9ine King Rat, but this guy was called King Rat in the prison system. And we're going to get into this story. I find it very interesting, and like I said before, if you guys got time to listen to this, please do. Okay, so we're going to get into this story from Westward. Credit this story to Westward magazine, coming out of Denver, Colorado. Okay, now the story is called How a Career Criminal Broke the Convict Code and Saved Himself. And like I said, I like to give credit to the Westward magazine. Right now, a few months back, this is the writer starting off. So let's get into it, guys. A few months back, I received an email from a stranger thanking me for an article that I had written nearly 20 years ago. The article, called Marked for Death, appeared in Westward magazine on May 25th, 2000. Now, it reported how USP Florence, a high-security penitentiary located 100 miles southwest of Denver, and had become the most violent prison in the entire federal system. Rocked by a series of inmate-on-inmate assaults and murders, ruled by gangs, and under investigation by the Justice Department for staff corruption, it was the worst place in the world to be if you were a snitch, or just suspected of being one. 3 of the most horrific killings had occurred in a special housing unit where the inmates seeking protective custody were housed, supposedly for their own safety. Now, we see how that went. They say 3 of the murders happened in that protective unit where they were supposed to be safe. And it said that there was a lot of staff corruption. Now, my correspondent had read the article shortly after it was published. He was sitting in the cell in USP Florence at the time. He explained, and working frantically to keep other prisoners from discovering his own secret life as a snitch, which included serving up some of the most notorious bank robbers in the Southwest to the FBI, informing on the leaders of the white supremacist gang to prison authorities, and cozying up to a meth cook who was suspected of killing 5 people, including 2 who were expected to testify against him. In his spare time, he was trying to figure out how to get out of Florence alive. Do I want to know? He asked. How I pulled it off? The message surged on, veering in a tone of confession to boast. I walked a tightrope unlike anything you could imagine, he wrote. Though I was once an outlaw and I deserved my prison time, I was never really that guy. Now I've come to a decision to try and tell my story. A story of a man's journey to find himself. The story was too surreal to be left untold. He insisted, complete with his near-death experiences, lost loves and second chances, and so much more, with a happy ending. That was my introduction to Wayne Byerly, a sultan of snitches, the crown prince of confidential informants, King Rat, a man who, after decades of being enmeshed in what sociologists call a criminal lifestyle. Damn, it was hard for me to get that word out. Committed to the ultimate transgression and was actually proud of it. That's no small point. Despite whatever cop show drivel you may have heard about the convict code, stop snitching, omerta, and so on, criminals rat on each other. Criminals rat on other criminals all the time. They do it to shave off their time, of their sentences, to collect reward money, to betray those who betrayed them, to get an extra cookie before lights out in the cell block. They do it for all kinds of reasons, but they rarely eager to admit they do it. Byerly has his share of self-serving motives, but in his case, what started out as a form of payback became a death-defying crusade and a quest for redemption. So I guess this guy I guess he's trying to say, right? To me, it sounds like he's trying to rationalize why he's snitching, right? Isn't that that's what I got of that, right? Seems like he's trying to rationalize, like he's trying to make this some kind of conquest for him snitching, right? I don't know. Tell me, guys, in the comment, what do you think about that? You got in the game, you knew what the game was about, and now all of a sudden, when you get that time, and you know what I'm saying, and, like they used to have a show say that if don't do the crime if you can't do the time. And now this guy, to me personally, it seems like he's trying to rationalize what he's about to do, right? Let's get back into it. Another man in his position would have vanished quietly into the Federal Witness Security Program, also known as WITSEC, keeping his head down, never looking back for fear that something was gaining on him. Not Byerly. He wears his snitch jacket like a badge of honor. After he got out of Florence, WITSEC provided him with a new identity and a new start. But he left the program a few years ago and went to court to have his name changed back to Byerly. He's had a series of names over the years, from the aliases he adopted in his bank robbing days to those he's used in prison, where he's known as Spud among prisoners and by the code name Uncle Sam to the Bureau of Prisons intel officer. To the identities WITSEC supplied by Byerly, the name he was born with suits him best. He's not hiding anymore. More emails followed, then phone calls. One day he made a 13-hour drive to Denver from southern Idaho, where he grew up and now lives. He brought a pile of legal papers and a guitar. I bought the pizza. I sifted through documents that had been filed in a court under seal, attesting to his cooperation with the government in convicting the former bank robbing partners, disrupting prison gang operations, and putting the meth cook on death row. He talked for hours, showed me his misaligned, impacted knuckles he'd acquired from bare-fisted fights behind bars, and sang a few songs he'd written, ballads about loss and the outlaw life and the long road home. I flew to Idaho to talk to family members, ex-girlfriends, lawyers, prosecutors, and a man who used to rob banks with Byerly in Arizona. I studied crime scene photos from his last disastrous bank job in Tucson, which ended in a shootout with police, and letters written to his attorney during his 13-month high-wire act in Florence. What had seemed far-fetched at first checked out, from major events to minor details, all the way to the surprise twist at the end, which I can't get to right now, or it wouldn't be a surprise. So you guys need to stay tuned. Also, you hear him saying there's a surprise to this story. So like I said, if you can't listen all the way, come back to it sometime and listen to it. Now, deep in the paper trail were some letters and medical records that hinted at what his double life as a convict informant had cost him, physically and emotionally. I had never thought of snitching as having a heroic dimension, but clearly in some cases, justice depends on it. In a world where loyalty to your tribe is prized over individual conscience, where the President of the United States rages against the flippers among his own merry men and declares that it ought to be illegal to cut deals with the government, Byerly's journey redeemed himself as a certain renaissance. You can say he ratted his way out, Byerly says. I understand that. I lived the prison culture, but I did what I did for a reason. I became a human being and left the garbage behind. And if that meant sweeping up some garbage on the way out to show the world that I really meant it and to put myself in a position where there was no way I was going back, I was proud to do it. Some people seem destined for a life of crime because of their origins. Shake the family tree, and you'll find a history of substance abuse and privatation, adult male relatives cycling through gangs in prison, a profusion of cousins and godfathers named Vito, and so on. Not Wayne Byerly. He comes from a hard-working, law-abiding, middle-class stock, and his transformation into a career criminal, a pariah, a three-time loser, what he likes to call a knucklehead, was truly a matter of choice. Byerly was born in Anchorage in 1961 and spent a lot of his childhood on Army bases in Kansas, Alabama, Georgia, Idaho. His father, John Owen Byerly, served 30 months in Vietnam as a Special Forces officer and received the Bronze Star. To Wayne and his three siblings, he was a forbidding presence. He was a good man, but he was a hard ass, Wayne says. I'm sure he did and saw things over there that changed him. He never spoke of Vietnam to our family, ever. Now, in 1973, John Byerly, now a lieutenant colonel, retired from the service and moved his family to a 35-acre farm in Middleton, Ohio, a tiny community a short drive from Boise. He worked at the local bank, drank heavily, and was often at odds with Wayne, the younger of his two boys. Wayne was bright but hyper and impulsive from a very early age. He was frequently found in some place he had been told not to go, doing something he wasn't supposed to do. By the time he reached high school, his siblings say Wayne was running with the wrong crowd. That's how it usually starts, right? You, when you get to high school, you get in that puberty stage, you know what I'm saying, and you start wanting to think for yourself and stop listening to your parents. That's how it usually starts. Now, amid the boredom of the life in Middleton, what really jazzed him was fast cars and impressing girls, both of which required cash. When he was 16, he and another juvenile burgled a neighbor's house, making off with a stash of bills, cameras, and a corn collection. Jammed up by the detectives afterward, he was required to make restitution and released even though he refused to give up his accomplice. Okay, now see, he didn't start off as a snitch, right? He was doing the right thing back in the day. He refused to give up his partner, right? When he was a young kid. So it wasn't like he was a snitch from the beginning, or he was just ratting on his people from the beginning. Even as at a young age, he knew that snitching was wrong, right? Okay. He dropped out of school and joined the Army Reserve. He learned to box and discovered he wasn't bad at it. A few months later, he enlisted in the Navy, part of a plea deal that got him out of another jam after he and a buddy were picked up by police in a stolen car outside Las Vegas. The Navy failed to deliver on its promise to provide him training in electronics, and he was honorably discharged after a year. More thefts followed. Still not quite 20, he was arrested for stealing 18 pigs from a Middleton farmer and selling them at auction. He got county jail time, probation, and a suspended prison sentence. The setback didn't dissuade him. It encouraged him to think bigger. He began to plan a job at a local market where he'd worked for years. He had been unfairly discharged. He insists for a shortage in the register that wasn't his fault. Now, I kind of find that ironic, right? So he's saying that, okay, I was fired from stealing from a register, and since you fired me and unfairly, I'm going to come back and rob the place, right? That was his mindset. I find that kind of crazy. The score went down without a hitch. Byerly chatted up the owner at the front of the store while his accomplice came through the back door and raided the safe, which was generally left unlocked during business hours. Sipping away with $1,500, Byerly figured he had a plausible denial, since he stayed away from the vicinity of the safe the whole time he was in the place. He was mistaken. The theft was quickly pegged as an inside job, and Byerly was the logical insider. Some witnesses even claim he took the money himself. This time, the judge sentenced the babyface heist meister to 5 years in prison. The decision shocked Byerly, who had hoped for probation or at least a boot camp for young offenders rather than a state pen. The day he arrived, he hit the yard with trepidation, expecting bad things. I was a pretty boy, he says. I was 21, but I looked 17. I could fight, but I was afraid of getting ganged up on. As it turned out, he had more cred than he realized. One of the first people he encountered was the penitentiary's most famous resident, Claude Dallas, a trapper who had been the focus of a nationwide manhunt after he gunned down 2 state game wardens in his remote camp. Byerly had met Dallas briefly at the county jail in Caldwell. Dallas remembered him and greeted him warmly, which gave other inmates the impression that the new fish wasn't quite as green as he seemed. Byerly also began to hang out with Steve Boyce, a large, soft-spoken athlete who played baseball and football at a rival high school and near Middleton, and was also doing time for burglary. He and Byerly had never crossed paths before, but they knew some of the same people and had blazed down some of the same streets drag racing. Byerly in his 67 Cougar and Boyce in his 68 Camaro. In prison, they became thick as thieves. Byerly's reputation as a fighter also helped. He quickly let it be known he was a 1983 Golden Gloves state champion in the welterweight division. A slight exaggeration, he actually made it to the quarterfinals. He moved well enough to dispel doubts, pummeling anyone who took him on in the Penn's boxing ring. Most of his fellow cons knew almost nothing about the sweet science. That's what I'm talking about, and sometimes I get on my channel, right? And because I'm a boxing fan too, and if anybody out there, I don't mean to sidetrack real quick, but if anybody out there, when I put out a boxing video, come check me out sometimes, because I do like to talk boxing sometimes, and I like to talk the sweet science. Even Byerly knows about the sweet science, right? A convict. All right, let's get back to it. Paroled after 2 years, Byerly made a stab in the square John life. He married the longtime sweetheart who waited for him and launched his own business pouring concrete in Boise. Okay, so he's getting back on his feet. He was doing well for someone just out of the joint, but the money wasn't coming fast enough to suit him. Okay, he about to start thinking. That's you know what I'm saying? He's thinking now because the money ain't coming fast enough. He also discovered cocaine. There we go. And it wasn't long before a nosy police officer caught him in a parking lot by the Boise River snorting the devil's dandruff in his car with a barmaid. The infraction didn't land him back in prison, but it did lead to his parole being extended for another year. That was unacceptable, Byerly says. I wanted to be a free man. An obliging friend provided him a social security number and other vital statistics. Byerly left Idaho calling himself Tony Martin, and he found a job in Phoenix with a girl with a public relations firm. He brought his wife down and introduced her around as his girlfriend. Months later, a call came into the office. Someone wanted to speak to Wayne Byerly. The receptionist told the caller that no such person worked there. A few minutes later, the caller was back on the line asking for Tony Martin. It was Steve Boyce. Having found the terms of his own parole too onerous, Boyce had decided to move to Arizona. He dropped by his old buddy's apartment, played Monopoly with his host until his wife went off to bed, then took Byerly aside and showed him a few items hidden in the toiletry kit. They included a starter pistol, a wig, and a fake mustache. From his wallet, he produced a brief article clip from a newspaper. The headline, "Bewigged Man Robs Boise Bank." Okay, we all know where this is heading, right? I mean, this guy's story reads like a movie, and that's why I'm giving it to you guys, because it reads like a movie to me, you know what I mean? Now, let's get back. With the right tools, Boyce explained, a man could do well for himself. For just a few seconds of heart-pounding effort, he'd walked out the bank in Boise with 10 grand, damn near half of what Tony Martin made in an entire year. Byerly listened, his own mind started racing with ideas. If he'd ever did anything that crazy, he told himself, he wouldn't carry around a clipping announcing it to the world, and he would have a better disguise and something better than a starter pistol. And most of the time, I had good intentions, Byerly says, but part of my brain was always on the lookout for an opportunity. He broke it down for me right there, and I couldn't help myself. It had already started in my mind. I started thinking about cash stash and how nice it would be to have some of that. They used the starter pistol on a couple of trial runs, stick-ups at hotels that generated just enough cash to finance a visit to the pawn shop that offered a selection of reasonably priced used firearms. The first bank was a place on the Camelback Road where Tony Martin cashed his paychecks. They wore fake beards but carried real guns. Boys took one teller, barely another. They showed the guns. The tellers pulled stacks of cash out of the drawers and handed it to them. Byerly was astonished at how easy it was. They wrapped their fingers in transparent tape in an effort to avoid leaving prints, but Byerly was sweating so freely that the tape hung in loops as he scooped up the dough. Rattled, he started to head back out of the front door, even though the getaway car was parked on the side of the back. "Homie, this way," Boyce shouted. Byerly spun around. Bill spilled out of his hoodie as he ran. "It was a learning experience," Byerly says. "We got something like 17,000. I had never had that much money in my life. I knew I was going to do it again." 3 weeks later, they hit the Western Savings and Loan on Bell Road, the kind of target they preferred because it had walled-in parking lot in the back. You could hop the wall, jump into a getaway car none of the employees could see, and get away clean. In theory, anyway. That's what he thought. This time they made off with close to 30 grand in a dye pack, which exploded in the plastic bag Byerly was carrying as he was going over the wall. He got a face full of red dye and tear gas, just like those idiots in Raisin, Arizona, he says. Coughing, wheezing, snot, and bills flying everywhere, Byerly told Boyce to drive while he tried to clear his eyes. They managed to save most of the haul, tossing out the dye, drenched outer bills, and trimming the red off the borders of the rest. That too was a learning experience. In subsequent jobs, Byerly avoided the bait packs, ordering the tellers to make the withdrawals from the lower drawer or the cash cow cart kept nearby. He began to carry a radio frequency detector so he could quickly find and discard any tracking devices planted in the stacks as a police scanner as well. So he's learning, bro. He on the job training with this dude, right? He just done left the John Square life, as he called it. He all in now. He's all in. He was strictly professional, Boyce recalls. "We crossed all our T's and overanalyzed everything, every possible aspect of the operation and what could go wrong." Not long after embarking on his new career, Byerly put his arm in a sling, walked into the P&R firm and told his boss that Tony Martin was injured and was going to take some time off. He and Boyce ran up staggering tabs in dance clubs in Scottsdale and played a lot of golf. Partied lavishly. When their funds got low, they hit another bank, this time for 50 grand. "I knew this couldn't last," Byerly says, "but it's crazily addictive, the adrenaline and then the money. The only people between you and the money are Mary, Jim, and Steve, who are trained to give it to you if you ask." It lasted only a few weeks thanks to his weakness for cocaine, women, and coke-addled sex. Vacationing in Marina del Rey, he managed to convince a local cokehead that he was a big-time dealer and could deliver a kilo if the man fronted him 10 grand and let him borrow his Camaro IROC Z28 for a couple of days. He was in no hurry to deliver, and the car was soon reported stolen. Police dining at a Denny's in Phoenix spotted it in a parking lot at a La Quinta next door, which led them to a 26-year-old white male in the middle of an epic binge at the motel with a girl he had picked up in a bar who was younger than her ID said she was, which led them to the guns, marijuana, and cocaine on the premises, and the confirmation that the male who called himself Tony Martin was Wayne Byerly, a parole absconder from Idaho. A little more investigation indicated that their man was a suspect in at least 3 bank robberies. A car used in one of the getaways had been tracked back to the prior owner, who claimed he sold it to Martin Byerly person. As the evidence mounted, Byerly could feel the tissue-thin efforts he made to cover his tracks beginning to shred and blow away. Cursing his stupidity and facing the prospect of spending most of his life behind bars, he took a plea deal for a 15-year sentence. He could have cut his time significantly by giving up his partner, but Byerly refused to name Boyce, insisting that his accomplice was a mysterious biker only known as Spider. Arrested months later on the basis of other tips, Boyce elected to take a 4-year deal on a conspiracy charge rather than roll the dice in court. Rowdynationtv, welcome back to the channel. Do me a favor, guys, click that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so anytime I drop a video, you guys can be notified. All right, we're going to get back into the story. Now, Byerly's wife divorced him. He disappeared into the federal system where he was known as a stand-up guy for not ratting on his partner. At a prison in Memphis, his cellmate showed him how to play a few chords on the guitar. Byerly taught himself to read music and started writing his own songs. It was like something inside him was shifting, trying to get his attention, show him that he could be a better person and not terrorize bank employees for a living. But it wasn't easy to ignore that small voice. He was a convict, true blood and old school, and well on his way to an advanced degree in knuckleheadology. He was paroled in 1993, but a series of failed drug tests, halfway house escapes, and other parole violations kept sending him back. He was either behind bars or a fugitive for months at a time over the next 4 years. He was still on parole when he started robbing banks again in Phoenix, leading to a crew drawn largely from associates he had met in prison, including Robert Brad Leonard and brothers Dennis James Teague, known as Red and Irish, respectively. The new crew became known as the Wells Fargo Bandits because of their preference for exploiting the security flaws of Wells Fargo banks. Byerly had nothing but contempt for the note guys and other amateurs. He liked to think he surrounded himself with takedown professionals, guys who could put everyone on the floor and take what they wanted. Their aim was to hit every gas station and get out in 90 seconds or less, moving from front to rear and tapping the drive-through tellers on the way out. Over a period of several months, the crew robbed 4 banks in Phoenix, coming away with 6-figure hauls on the last 2. Boyce joined in. On July 1st, 1996, the Wells Fargo on West Indian School Road was hit for $156,114, according to court documents. The Teague brothers drove a diversion vehicle, and another man waited outside with the getaway car while Byerly and Boyce went into the bank wearing wigs, fake beards, and facial putty. On November 15th, 1996, the Wells Fargo on West Thunderbird Road was robbed of $144,720 by the 2 men wearing Reagan and Nixon masks. The getaway driver would later admit to receiving $14,000 from the take, while Byerly and Boyce split the rest. Byerly burned down his share in next to no time. A hard-working fellow could always use a new Corvette or a fancy vacation, and because of his fugitive status, he spread cash around the crew members who fronted for him whenever it was time to rent a new place or get fresh new wheels. It made him uneasy, all these sponges hanging around him with their hands out. He called them Klingons. Too many people knew his real name and where he lived. And what if one of them decided to drop a dime on him because he wasn't generous enough with the gratitudes and the bonuses? His vulnerability to snitches became painfully apparent during a ski trip in Colorado. A few weeks after the Thunderbird Road robbery, as he and Boyce wandered around Crested Butte, he couldn't shake the feeling that people were staring at them. They went to rent snowmobiles, and the proprietor seemed to be stunned that Byerly asked him what was up. The man showed him a wanted poster. "I gotta say, you guys don't look like bank robbers," he said. The poster had their names and photos. It advised citizens of Crested Butte to be on the lookout for 2 convicted bank robbers, both federal fugitives from Albuquerque, who were said to be on their way to the town to rob a bank or 2. The tip had come to the county law enforcement from the FBI. There were posters all over town. Byerly soon discovered, including on the front doors of the town's bank. It was a loony idea. What kind of moron would rob a bank in a place with only one viable road out of town? But for some of the incorrect details in the poster, Byerly knew instantly where the tip had come from. He told the girlfriend of one of the members of his crew that he was going to Crested Butte, and he lied to her about moving his residence to Albuquerque because he didn't trust her. Byerly and Boyce was arrested at the Gunnison Airport as they tried to slip back to Arizona. The police had nothing on them except their respective parole violations, but the FBI continued to question Byerly about his rumored involvement in the Wells Fargo robberies during the next 9 months he spent in custody. Shireen Farr, who was Byerly's fiance at the time, remembers the FBI showing up at her house with a search warrant the day after his arrest, looking for loot. They didn't find anything, she recalls. They kept asking me if I had lots of money. Did I see stacks of money? I didn't have anything to tell them because I didn't know anything. Byerly was released to a halfway house in September. He walked away from the place 10 days later, relying on his crew to arrange for new digs. He had one more haul scored in his sights. Okay, now that's where we go. He had one more haul. Dude just gets out, gets into a halfway house. 10 days later, he walks away. That's crazy. So you guys know what's coming up next. A busy bank in Tucson that promised to be the biggest haul yet, enough to pay off all his Klingons, set up a new identity, and disappear. In the fall of 1997, while preparing for the bank robbery in Tucson, Byerly also worked on the side project of his own making. The project can't be verified in the same ways his other activities can because it involves a crime that, if it had happened, was never reported. Byerly's account of this interlude raises more questions than answers. Perhaps, but he's talking about it now. He says because it helps to explain the dramatic change of direction he took soon afterward. Okay, now the story we're about to get into right now, from what I'm reading, cannot be substantiated by everything else that this guy has, reported on. In course of his journeys through the halfway houses of Greater Phoenix, Byerly had become acquainted with a man named Max, diagnosed with schizophrenia. Max preferred meth to his prescribed medication, even though that preference frequently got him in legal trouble. But Max also had connections in the rarefied world of international diamond and gold traders. As they discussed possible future ventures, he told Byerly about one jeweler he knew he dealt in merchandise of dubious provenance. Now, provenance, I'm not sure what that word means, but I'm thinking it's something bad. A 5-star fence. Max had been in this man's house and seen a safe stuffed with cash and jewels. That safe could be a big score for somebody, Max suggested. Nothing sweeter than stealing what was already stolen. He's not going to report it. Byerly knew nothing about jewels, but he was interested. He gave Max a ride once in his beater Corolla to the man's house, just to check it out. The man's place was a palace, but then Max got revoked out of the halfway house and Byerly was on to other things. It was only in the last weeks before the Tucson robbery that he started thinking about building an extra cushion for himself, just in case. He found the jeweler's mansion again. A horse trail on the ridge behind the property offered just enough cover that Byerly could sit there with his binoculars and watch the man puttering around the flowers and bushes in his well-kept backyard. He came back to the same observation post several times until he was convinced that the man lived alone. One afternoon toward dusk, he brought a bag of equipment, waited on the ridge until the man appeared. Then he put on a ski mask, jumped the back wall, showed the man his gun, and escorted him inside. "Take what you want," the man said. "Just don't hurt me." Byerly gave the usual assurances about no one getting hurt as long as they did what they were told. The safe was on the time clock and wouldn't open until the morning. He fixed his host a sandwich and sat up with him, listening to the police scanner he brought with him. Shortly after sunrise, the time lock expired, and he watched carefully as the man opened the safe and stepped aside. There were velvet-lined boxes inside filled with diamonds, but Byerly hardly looked at them. He was transfixed by the brick of cash, wrapped in plastic, about the size of a briefcase. $100 bills and banded stacks of 100 each, fresh from the bank, compact in and series. 10,000 to a stack, and by his count, 100 stacks. A fearful symmetry that worked out to a cool million. On another shelf in a fat pile was a random collection of used bills, hundreds and fifties and 20s. They came to around 70,000 and change. The money was heavy. He took it all. He left the man shackled to the table leg and told him not to free himself for 15 minutes. At home, he broke the package into smaller bundles, resealed them in plastic, duct taping the hell out of every bundle. He stacked them into 2 aqua blue plastic ice chests, packed a whole load in cat litter to help absorb moisture. He sealed the coolers, put them in the trunk, and drove north out of Phoenix to the rim country between Payson and Camp Verde, a summer getaway area surrounded by national forest land near Strawberry. He took a gravel road that dipped deeper into the teeming ponderosa pines until he came to a place where he stashed money before. This time he dug deeper than he ever had buried the coolers, notching nearby trees with a hatchet and checking his odometer to gauge the exact distance from the nearest cattle guard. He told no one where he had been or what he'd done. Asked why, if he had so much money sitting in the ground, he went ahead with yet another bank robbery, and he shrugs. I thought I could have had both, he says. I've been planning Tucson for a long time. I had it covered. It was going to be easy. They settled on the Friday before Christmas, when the supersized Wells Fargo on East Grant Road in Tucson would be well stocked for holiday shoppers and people cashing paychecks, and the merchant tellers would be raking in deposits from cash-heavy retailers. Irish Teague drove and stayed with the car, a Buick Park Avenue. Wayne Byerly, Brad Leonard, Red Teague headed into the bank shortly after noon with ski mask on. The plan was for Byerly to rob the regular tellers while Leonard went to the merchant stations and Red covered them both. They would meet at the back of the door and Irish would pick them up on the blind side of the building by the drive-thru. But Leonard Byerly says deviated from the plan. He tried to find someone to open the vault. Then he almost pulled a bookcase down on top of himself while trying to extract the videotape recording the robbery. After 2 minutes, Byerly heard the call on the police scanner of a 211 in progress. The call had come sooner than expected because a bystander outside had seen masked men going into the bank and called 911. Byerly waited impatiently by the back door, wondering what was keeping Leonard. He screamed. They prearranged signal to flee. The cry was supposed to mislead the police into thinking that the robbers were Hispanic, so they were screaming, "Andale, andale." Finally, Leonard came running towards the exit, his still half-empty bag flapping. Red climbed into the front of the Buick. Byerly and Leonard piled in the back and started rummaging through Byerly's bag of cash, looking for tracking devices. Byerly threw two out the window. They missed one in the scatter of the bills on the floor. They had gone only a few blocks when Irish spotted a police car behind them, and then the cop on his radio. "Sharky, we've got a Sharky." They made a couple of quick turns. The police car followed, staying a respectful distance behind. The Buick pulled over. Byerly kneeled out the back floor, cocked his 9mm, and fired, blowing out the Buick's back window. The Buick roared off. The chase through the midtown and the north side of the towns reached up to about 50 miles per hour or more amid occasional bursts of gunfire. When Irish had managed to put a little distance between them and the police, he slowed for one turn and Red leapt out, tumbled along the asphalt and started running. Leonard was the next to go, scooting out of his seat, knocking the scanner and wads of money out with him, rolling and skidding, and finally on his feet and running, the wind snatching the bills in his wake. A few moments later, Irish pulled over behind an abandoned building trying to lose the tail, but the description of the car was out. They were soon spotted by another officer who'd left his patrol car and was approaching on foot. As they sped off, the officer opened fire with a shotgun. Byerly felt something rip into his back and returned fire. Byerly got out a few blocks later along a desolate stretch of East Delano Street. He told Irish to dump the car and leave the money behind. The car was found a couple of blocks away, riddled with 22 bullets. The back tires were flat, the interior a mess of blood, crumbs of glass, and loose bills. Witnesses saw a stocky red-haired man with a Hawaiian shirt and torn pants leg walking nearby, pausing to stuff something in the clump of palm trees. The man was soon arrested, and $4,000 in cash and a semi-automatic pistol was retrieved from the palms. Helicopters, dogs, and SWAT team descended on the area, which was sealed off to traffic. Byerly hid in a storage shed for 2 for 2 hours, then surrendered as the SWATs surrounded the place. He had no gun on him and none of the loot. But he says the police worked out their frustrations on him anyway. In addition to the pellet in his back, he had acquired numerous contusions, a dislocated jaw, aching ribs, and a ruptured testicle by the time he had saw the doctor. Miraculously, no one else had been injured, though at least 3 police officers reported being fired upon during the chase. Red and Leonard eluded the dragnet for a few days. Byerly sat tight, expecting his partners to come to his rescue with the ace defense attorneys. In his more delusional moments, he even imagined they might break him out during one of his trips to court. But on Christmas Eve, a call to his girlfriend, Alexa, clued him into the true state of things. Byerly had asked her to retrieve some belongings from his house. She reported that she found the place cleaned out, presumably by Teague and Leonard. Leonard soon showed up at her house, she added, with a 6-pack of beer and told her that Byerly was never going to get out of prison and that she should just forget him. He tried to kiss her. I remember being very emotional, very upset, she recalls, and he was trying to hit on me. Okay, now we get into the meat and gravies of this story, right? So, now remember all the other times he went to jail, he stayed true to the game. He never said anything to anybody, you know what I'm saying? I'd hate to say this, but, you know, it's always a woman. I don't know. I don't want to be, you know, but most of the times it's always a woman involved when it comes to people who are involved in the game. They hustling out there in the streets and somebody go down. And like you said, it's the man that done came over here and tried to hit on his woman while he in jail. Let's get back to it and see what happens. And is this the reason for why this man is about to do what he was about to do? Byerly was furious. He would never betray a partner like that. And yet, what did he owe these backstabbers anyway? Leonard, in his view, had screwed up the robbery by not sticking to the plan. Leonard's girlfriend had been the cause of the Crested Butte fiasco, and he was supposed to go away forever just to protect these bastards? Alexa urged him to think about the unthinkable, naming his partners in order to reduce his own sentence. These people are not your friends, she told him. Over the next several weeks, Byerly had ample occasion to reflect on the absurdity of the convict code. He thought about all the heartache he'd caused his parents, his ex-wife, anyone else he had cared about that had cared about him. He thought about the years he had lost inside and the ones he was going to lose if he took the brunt of the 16 charges he was facing over the Tucson robbery. He thought about waking up Christmas morning to the sounds of guards rushing into the cell next door where an inmate had tried to kill himself with a razor blade. Merry fucking Christmas. He thought about what was waiting for him buried in the woods. The money he could not touch because he had been so cocky, stupid, and loyal to the wrong people. Every day he dug it up in his mind, wondering if he had ever see it again. Now remember, people, he went to jail. I mean, he went and buried that money. If y'all still listening, he went and buried that money in the woods, right? He said that's like, what, a cool $1 million that he got buried in the woods, but he still went and done this other job, and now he done got busted. And now his friends is hitting on his, you know, on his woman. Now, so if we were to believe that story to, you know, like he said he did that hit with the guy who had the jewels. Now, something in me snapped, he says. I called my lawyer and said, tell the FBI I want to set up a free talk. Here we go. A free talk is an exploratory bit of snitching, an opportunity for a suspect to coax a possible deal from the prosecutors by revealing information about crimes, on the condition that the information won't be used to prosecute the source. Byerly had a lot to tell and told it all. Everything except the robbery of the diamond broker. The feds arranged to record a phone call he had with Leonard, assuring his ex-partner that he was on a secure lawyer phone. He proceeded to lure Leonard into a conversation about his narrow escape from the getaway car. Coming clean also meant up giving Steve Boyce, who hadn't been a part of the Tucson robbery. Their relationship had frayed over the years. Still, Byerly says he'd made up his mind not to testify against Boyce. He recorded a call with him too, but the two had different memories of that conversation. Byerly says he went out of his way to ask obvious, incriminating questions to alert his old buddy to what he was doing. Boyce remembers being appalled that his friend would turn on him. I told him, "You can't tell the FBI agent standing next to you that I'm not going nowhere," he says. "I don't know what you talking about. Shame on you, and I hung up." Steve Boyce, see what it says? Steve Boyce caught wind, but he did say he tried to make it obvious, to let him know that the police was standing right there. So I'm not sure if he gave, it seems like he gave him a heads up because, like he said, Boyce says he remembered telling him, "Shame on you," and hung up the phone. Now, as the investigation turned into indictments, Byerly was shifted from jail to jail, from Tucson to Phoenix, and places in between, in an effort to house him apart from his co-defendants. The effort failed miserably. He and Leonard were stuck in the same holding cell at one point. During that awkward encounter, Byerly assured his ex-partner that they were still on the same side, a fiction that would last only until Leonard's attorney got the discovery in the case. On another occasion, Byerly was taken to court on the same bus with Boyce and even sat shackled to him in a federal courtroom while the judge quizzed him about his intent to cooperate. Byerly knew that the news of his snitching would soon be spreading throughout the jail system. He'd hoped to be placed in the witness security program down the line. He was still waiting to hear about the WITSEC placement when another inmate who was facing armed robbery charges began asking him for advice. Julius Dixon had committed 6 bank robberies in the Phoenix area in a matter of months. Wrapping his head in bandages to hide a distinctive face tattoo, his yield had been a meager in all but one of them. He came away with less than $3,000. Dixon was impressed with Byerly's 6-figure hauls and discussed his own exploits freely, looking for pointers. Hoping to improve his chances for the WITSEC, Byerly began snitching on Dixon. Byerly began snitching on Dixon too. Dixon didn't find out about the snitch's identity until Byerly had been moved elsewhere. He agreed to plead guilty to 5 counts of armed robbery rather than go to trial and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Byerly testified in court against Leonard, who got 20 years. Boyce's case never went to trial. He ended up pleading to 1 count of armed robbery and served 6 years in prison. From surveillance video the FBI screened from him, Byerly identified Reg Teague as the culprit in another unsolved bank robbery, and Teague ended up taking the plea too. Whoa. So he on the road now. He done started, right? That's why they tell you when you go to jail, a lot of people who do go to jail, they sit in there and you don't discuss your case with nobody. This man sitting there and freely discussed all his case with this guy, and he went right back to the police and told exactly what about this guy's robberies that he committed, and then he gets all this time in jail. He gets 25 years in jail, from just running his mouth to somebody he don't even know. You know what I mean? So on January 3rd, 2000. Byerly was sentenced to 84 months in prison for his role in the Wells Fargo robberies. His snitching had saved him from what easily could have been a 30-year stretch. The problem now was how to survive the next 7 years. WITSEC turned him down because his crimes were gang-related. The government's position was that the U.S. Bureau of Prisons could protect him from any reprisals. The BOP has low-fee facilities that primarily house protected witnesses. The residents are issued ID cards that list only an initial instead of their last name. But Byerly was on a different path. In its inscrutable wisdom, the BOP decided to house him in the worst place in the federal system for snitches, the U.S. Penitentiary Florence, which had 8 inmate murders in the first 6 years of operation. Okay, now we're talking about ADX Max, and this is when they first opened, right? You heard what I just read, right? In the first 6 years, they had 8 murders. Carmen Fisher, Byerly's attorney, was shocked when she learned where he had been sent. "I worked like the dickens to get him into the WITSEC program," she recalls. "Instead, they sent him to this really dangerous prison where so many people were doing multiple life sentences. The lesson here is that you work with the government at your own peril. They can be pretty inept when they want you. They're good to you, but when it's over, it's over. Opened in 1994, the Federal Correction Complex in Florence, Colorado consists of 4 facilities housing 4 distinct inmate populations: a work camp, a medium security prison, a high security penitentiary, and the federal supermax. When Byerly heard that he was being sent to Florence, he assumed he would be celled at FCI Florence, the medium security prison where he had done time before. Nobody called his name when the bus stopped at FCI or the Supermax. The bus riders dwindled to a handful. The high security pen loomed at the last stop, and Byerly knew he was screwed. Rowdy Nation TV, guys, you rocking with Rowdy Nation TV. Click that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so anytime I drop a video, you guys can be notified. Let's get back to it. Although the Supermax next door has more infamous residents, the Unabomber, mob bosses, and so on, those bad boys are locked in their solitary cells for up to 23 hours a day and live in relative safety. The inhabitants of the USP Florence tend to be serving longer sentences for violent crimes and escapes, but there are fewer restrictions on their movements and more opportunities for extortion, rape, gang wars, and other predations. At the time Byerly got there, the penitentiary had nearly twice as many inmates as it was designed to hold. Thanks in part to the overwhelming gang presence, more than 40 distinct security threats, from the Aryan Brotherhood, the Bloods, and the Mexican Mafia to the Latin Kings, the DC Blacks, and more obscure groups, some working in concert and others battling each other. The assault rate was through the roof. In one 17-month period, USP Florence logged 94 inmate stabbings or beatings, roughly 1 for every 10 inmates. Since most inmate-on-inmate assaults are never reported, the actual figure was probably much higher. Violence erupted in other ways too. Persistent rumors about staff corruption had triggered a Justice Department investigation of a group of rogue correction officers who called themselves the Cowboys. According to the 55-count federal indictment, the Cowboys administered their own brand of vigilante justice, typically by beating and torturing inmates and then fabricating evidence, making it look like the inmates attacked them. Their motto, lie until you die. But what truly set the USP Florence apart from other high-security pens was the grisly fate of its snitches. In the months leading up to Byerly's arrival, the killings had become more brazen, demonstrating that the high security didn't mean any kind of security for the people inside. In one instance, inmate Maynard Campbell refused to leave his cell when 2 other prisoners arrived to accuse his cellmate of ratting on a wine-making operation in the prison bakery. Campbell was stabbed 27 times. His cellie was badly wounded, but survived. A few days later, drug smuggler Mirza Areza Reyes got into an argument with his cellmate, Frank Melendez, whom he suspected of being a snitch. Areza Reyes had strong feelings about snitches. Having attacked another suspected informant with a padlock and a razor, he required all his roommates to sign affidavits swearing that they were not snitches. Unable to come to terms with Melendez, Areza Reyes beat and strangled him. He kept the body in the cell for 4 days, a period during which staff paperwork indicates Melendez went through several counts, received meals, and was taken to showers in the exercise yard. When he could no longer stand the smell, Areza Reyes notified a guard that Melendez was dead. "I took care of that snitch for you," he said. The incident became known as the Weekend at Bernie's killing, but that grotesque was soon overshadowed by a more extravagant foray into corpse abuse in October 1999, when bank robber Joey Estrella was killed and eviscerated in a special housing unit, the Shoe, by his 2 cellmates, cousins William and Rudy Sablon.
Now, we're going to do a story about that. I'm going to do a story about William and Rudy Sablon. I remember when that happened, and we're going to get into that. And so I'm not going to tell no little bit more about that because later on, I'm going to do another story about that. That's another crazy story. But years later, when federal prosecutors sought the death penalty for the Sablons, two federal juries declined to vote for execution. And so, just like I said, we're going to get into that story. I'm not going to get too much into that, but you can see that he, right before he had got there, all these crimes were being committed against people who were thought to be snitches or were snitches. But it just goes to show you the environment of how Florence was at that time that Byerly was there. It was, like they said, it was the most dangerous federal penitentiary in the states during the time Byerly was there. So let's get back to it. Byerly hit the yard at Florence 3 months after Estrella's murder. He could feel the tension in the air. The weight pile was full of shaved head, shirtless badasses showing off their Nazi ink, and it was clear that everyone stuck to their own clan. Many prisoners wore canteen-issued wraparound sunglasses that prevented you from seeing their eyes. Byerly felt like they were all studying him, and he resolved that and got him a pair quickly for himself. I've been in prison, but this was a different world, he says now. I was walking around these guys who were the biggest knucklehead killers and lived by this code, about the don't snitch code. Because he was from Idaho, they called him Spud. Prisoners often know each other chiefly by nicknames, and Byerly encouraged this one, trying to keep his real name from circulating as much as possible. An Aryan Brotherhood member who was an alumni of the Idaho State Pen quizzed him about people he might have met there, and soon Byerly was allowed to sit with the Adonis at Mills. I'm not sure what that means. The Adonis at Mills. Byerly had no gang affiliation, but the oddness was something of a catch-all for various strains of white supremacy, cloaked in Nordic mythology and all other kind of hoo-ha. He merely had to sit there and nod at skinheads and the dirty white boys and the nut jobs like David Lane, the getaway driver in the 1984 murder of Denver talk show host Alan Berg, blathered about the mud people, the Asatru, and the race wars to come. It was good camouflage, so no one questioned his bona fide as a separatist because, after all, he was from Idaho. But he knew his snitch jacket could surface at any moment. All it would take is someone off the bus who had been in jail in Arizona with Leonard and Dixon or Teague. The first test came after just weeks. He was fooling around in the music room when Super Dave, an AB shot caller, told him he wanted a word. Super Dave and his sharky-eyed sidekick, Tank, took him down to the hall to an empty bathroom where a third gang member, Youngster, stood guard. Byerly scanned the room anxiously as they walked in, wondering if someone was going to burst out of one of the stalls and shake him. Super Dave got right to the point. "Somebody says you're a rat," he said. Byerly had heard that when the bear approaches you, you're supposed to make yourself look bigger. He did not summon that. He did that now, summoning all the abbreviated outrage he could muster. "Who says that?" he demanded. "And fuck him. Take me to him right now." Super Dave seemed taken back. His source was an old dude, he explained, who had just arrived. Byerly knew the name. The guy looked like a shorter version of Colonel Sanders and was known for robbing banks and using taxis for his getaway. He had apparently come across Leonard in the Central Arizona Detention Center and heard about his partner had done him wrong. He said, "This is some bull." Byerly shot back, "Did he bring his paperwork?" In prison, paperwork is the ultimate arbiter of who's okay and who's no good. People can run their mouths all they want, but the contents of that PSI, that pre-sentencing investigation report, reveals the actual crimes and whether they rolled on anyone to cut their time. Super Dave conceded that the old dude might have got it wrong, but it was up to Byerly to produce the paperwork and clear things up. Now, For all us squareheads, you know what I'm saying? If you don't know anything about the federal pen, for people who don't, be going to jail like that, but I do. I know some people who've been to the feds. I haven't. I haven't been to the pen. So, but they say that when you get there, you got to have that PSI. That you got to have that paperwork. And if there's any, like you can see in this article right here, that's the final say, that paperwork. And it's a bad thing too if you claim somebody a snitch and they not a snitch and they produce that paperwork, then you can get dealt with also. So it goes both ways, right? In prison, paperwork is the ultimate arbitrator, right? That's what they said here. Now, Byerly promised to have his PSI overnighted to him and available for inspection. He went from the bathroom meeting to arrange a phone call with his lawyer. Now, it's about to get crazy, right? They on his heels right now, right? Carmen Fisher remembers the call. Byerly told her he was over his head that he needed paperwork that showed he wasn't a rat and that it had to be impeccable. She ginned up a new version of his PSI, matching the font of the original and eradicating any hint of cooperation. I spent the whole day, she recalls. I had to make the sentencing guideline numbers add up to the sentencing he got. The bogus report bought Byerly some time, but it also set other events in motion. Just hours after he shown Super Dave his PSI, he was summoned to the office of the Lieutenant John Carr, the penitentiary's intelligence officer. Fisher had called a prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Phoenix to express concerns about her client's safety, and the prosecutor called Carr. Carr didn't seem to know much about Byerly's situation. He seemed puzzled that he had been sent to the USP. He asked Byerly if he wanted to check in, and that means to go into protective custody. In another prison, that might make sense, but no check-in at Florence was guaranteed a single cell because of the overcrowding problem. Knowing what happened to Estrella and Melendez in the SHU, which was where most people check-ins ended up, Byerly quickly declined. Checking in will let everyone know he was a snitch and will probably get him killed, he said. Carr had another offer. He noticed that Byerly was getting friendly with the oddness. He could get him moved out of Florence in a year, he said, if Byerly was willing to provide useful information about the prison gang operations. The proposition was just crazy enough to appeal to Byerly. He was already on the brink of exposure, but if he was careful, this could get him moved someplace where he could do time with his liver intact. Over the next few months, Byerly burrowed deeper into the oddness camp. He sailed into a non-smoking unit made up of mostly of separatists and taught dirty white boys how to box. He never met with Carr again, but every once in a while he would drop a note to the lieutenant in the secure box intended for outgoing legal mail, alerting the administration to a cache of weapons, a still or a new method of smuggling drugs into the prison. The notes were signed Uncle Sam, and the tips dealt with common topics of the conversation in the community, nothing that would identify him or even his unit as the exclusive source. He made several friends among the oddness leadership. One high priest in particular seemed impressed by his paperwork, his boxing skills, and his loyalty. He was pleased to learn that Spud once took a 15-year sentence and then rather than rat on his partner. The priest hated rats. He began to tell Spud a thing or two about rats, stories that made his flesh crawl. The priest's name was Dustin Honkin. Listening to him rant, Byerly realized that he had found his ticket out of Florence. In the early 1990s, a plague of methamphetamine spread across the northern Iowa like a corn smut. The stuff was 97% pure and highly addictive, and the man behind it was a nerdy-looking farm boy in his early 20s. Like many meth cooks, Dustin Honkin started out with a modest lab in his garage, but he had an exceptional aptitude for chemistry, which he studied at at a community college, and he developed a unique process that produced crystal meth as potent as anything the DEA has ever seen. He soon set up a more sophisticated lab in Arizona desert and was shipping multi-pound quantities back to his Midwestern distribution network. Honkin took care to isolate himself from the street dealers who peddled his meth. But in 1993, state investigators managed to work their way up the food chain and turn two of Honkin's top distributors, Greg Nicholson and Terry DeHoose. Honkin was arrested after Nicholson wore a wire and recorded the kingpin bragging about his meth operation. The case went federal and looked like a slam dunk, but Honkin was released pending trial, and then the witnesses went missing. Nicholson vanished without a trace, along with his girlfriend Lori Duncan and her two daughters, 10-year-old Candy and 6-year-old Amber. DeHoose dropped off the radar a few weeks later. Prosecutors strongly suspected foul play, but could prove nothing. They were forced to dismiss the case. Although Honkin soon was back in business, he continued to have rat problems. Drug agents developed a new informant who alerted them to Honkin's new lab. Busted again, Honkin began to grumble to a business partner about narcs and snitches who needed to be killed. The partner was also alarmed that he too began to record Honkin, a preemptive strike to protect himself. Rather than face those recordings at trial, in 1997, Honkin took a plea deal that sent him to federal prison for 27 years. While still under investigation for the presumed murders of 5 people, by the time Byerly met him at Florence 3 years later, Honkin had shed his Doogie appearance. He had the close cropped hair and bodybuilder look of a seasoned con. He made hooch for white gang members and was considered a valuable asset. Thrice burned, he was paranoid about rats. But he also couldn't shut up about the subject, making ominous comments that were intended to impress other prisoners. "I killed my rats," he said. Byerly knew better than to press for details. Yet over time, he managed to insinuate himself into Honkin's inner circle, figuring that sooner or later the meth whiz would turn to his buddy Spud for advice. The opportunity came that fall after Honkin received bad news from Iowa. His girlfriend, Angela Johnson, had been arrested in connection with the disappearance of the witnesses. In jail, she had been conned by a master snitch who told her he'd help her pin the murders on someone else. All he needed to work his magic, he explained, was a map showing where the bodies was buried. Yo, this case right here, it runs deep, right? I mean, there's so many twists and turns that's going on in this story right here. I'm surprised it hasn't been turned into like a movie, you know what I'm saying? Because to me, it runs real deep and there's a lot of twists and turns. So let's get back to it. Johnson drew the map. The snitch turned it over to the cops. 5 skeletons, including those of 2 children, were found on the outskirts of Mason City. The 7-year-old mystery was breaking wide open. Honkin was furious. More rats. The rats were everywhere. What would Byerly do, he asked, if he was in his shoes? Byerly needed to understand the situation first. In bits and pieces, the story came out. Johnson had posed as a stranded motorist in order to gain entrance to the Duncan's house. Then Honkin had slipped in and tied and gagged Duncan and Nicholson at gunpoint. The hostages were taken to a wooded area and executed, shot in the head. First Nicholson, then Duncan, and then the children. Damn, man, this dude was just heartless, right? And at that time, he had that nerdy look. You just can't judge a book by its cover, right? If you would have seen this dude on the street, you wouldn't have blinked twice. Johnson had also lured DeHoose, a former boyfriend, to a field where he was beaten with a baseball bat and shot several times. He lured her former boyfriend, DeHoose. I'm sorry if I mixed that up. Byerly had difficulty hiding his revulsion. 5 people dead, including two two little girls? Just so Hunkin could spare himself a short prison sentence. You gotta do what you gotta do, he said carefully, but I would have found a way to do it without the kids there. Hunkin was indignant. Thousands of kids die every year and nobody gives a damn, he said. Byerly wrote to his attorney and directed her to get in touch with the federal prosecutor in Iowa. He wanted to help put Hunkin on death row, and he wanted an absolute ironclad written guarantee of witness protection in return. What y'all think so far? Is he justified? Leave me a comment in my comment section. Let me know. You think this guy is, okay, I'm not in the criminal world, and they say that you should never snitch. But do you think he found? I think, me personally, my opinion, I think he's reaching for straws to try to get out of jail. He basically said it. If you listen to, to the article, he basically said he was damn near about to do anything to get out of jail. You know what I mean? He went far and wide. This goes way deeper than what 6ix9ine ever did. You know what I mean? This guy is already in jail. He's snitched on his his co-defendants, to get a deal, to get the time that he had already got, right? So he snitched to get the deal he got to get in jail, right? And then when he get in jail, he starts snitching on the people that was in jail. And so I just think he's reaching for straws to try to justify his snitching. But that's what, maybe that's in God's plan for him to be in that place at that time, because those kids, man, did not deserve what they, for the things that, come on, I would have been, revulsed too, to hear somebody tell me how they killed 5 people and 2 of them were children. Kids don't have nothing to do with the stuff that of grown-ups, what grown-ups do in this world. Leave the kids alone. You know what I'm saying? That, this guy got whatever he got, and whatever else happens to him can't come quick enough. That's my opinion. Now, 2 investigators on the Hunkin case flew to Colorado and met secretly with Byerly. He gave them the notes he had made after the conversation with Hunkin, who was getting more paranoid day by day. With some justification, Steve Vest, a prisoner who celled with Byerly and later with Hunkin, had also been one of the Hunkin's confidants. But he left Florence abruptly, supposedly for a court hearing in his case. Hunkin had heard from a source that Vest was actually in Iowa singing to the grand jury. Wayne, you better not suddenly have a court date too, he told Byerly. But Hunkin still trusted Byerly enough to read letters to him that he received from Johnson and share his plans for exacting revenge for his troubles. He was going to subpoena Byerly and other trusted fellow cons as witnesses in his case, he explained, so they could all bust out together from county jail in Iowa and wreak havoc. They would go to a home of Assistant U.S. Attorney Pat Reinert, who pursued Hunkin for years, and kill his kids in front of him. Then they'd load a snap-on tool truck with a 55-gallon drum of nitro and blow up the DEA building in Chicago. Whoa, this dude is like, he's not attached to reality at all if he thinking that they could do all of this. You know what I mean? This dude is clearly not attached to reality, right? Let's continue. He said he was going to make the world forget about Timothy McVeigh, Byerly recalls. This wasn't just fanciful thinking. He had detailed plans. He said he had detailed plans. Byerly alerted Reinert's office about Hunkin's escape schemes. He stole a letter that Hunkin had received from Johnson, copped it right out of Hunkin's cell. His risk of exposure was increasing daily, but when the real trouble arrived, it came from a direction he hadn't expected at all. In May 2001, the penitentiary was in lockdown for weeks after a stabbing incident involving rival gang members. Investigation into the dispute revealed that 2 high-ranking female staff members had been involved in sexual relationships with several prisoners, including a convicted cocaine dealer who apparently had enjoyed the favors of both women. The women resigned and eventually faced criminal charges. One of the 2, unit manager Kelly Kissinger, was one of the few staffers who knew about Byerly's work as an informant. Kissinger was also believed to be friendly with Neil Huffman, a prisoner who'd been Hunkin's cellmate and close friend. An astute case manager whom Byerly credits with saving his life realized that Byerly's cover could have been blown at any moment before the lockdown lifted. Byerly was roused at midnight and told to pack his property. Within hours, he was on his way to a jail in Iowa to await his own appointment with the Hunkin grand jury. A few weeks later, he received a letter from a buddy at Florence telling him that Huffman, who had been moved to another prison, had written to Hunkin to alert him that Byerly was an informant. So now Dustin is convinced that you are a rat and has let everyone here know about it, the man wrote. If it is true, then I think I understand your motivation. If it is not true, well, I guess it doesn't matter because you just had that jacket hung on you anyway. As it turned out, Byerly was never summoned to testify at Hunkin's 2004 murder trial. The maestro of meth had bragged about killing his rats to so many prisoners that the prosecution had its pick of them. None of them thought it was a violation of the convict code to rat on someone who killed children. Byerly had been one of the first to come forward, but there was no need to drag him out of WITSEC and risk exposing his new identity, not with so many other volunteers eager to give Hunkin the needle. Hunkin got the death penalty. In a separate trial, Johnson was also sentenced to death for her role in the 1993 murders. One of only 2 women on death row in the entire federal system. In 2014, after years of appeals, her sentence was amended to life without parole. Hunkin remains on federal death row at USP Terre Haute. No execution date has been set. Shortly after his sentencing, in an interview with the Cedar Rapids Gazette, he denounced the informant who obtained the mats with the bodies as a weasel and expressed moral outrage at the snitch's behavior. He doesn't care about anyone but himself, he said. Okay, oh my God, this guy is crazy as hell. Straight detached from reality, talking about moral outrage for somebody telling on him from killing 5 people, 2 children at that. Wow. Somebody who is really detached from reality, and this guy, and he's exactly where he needs to be, off the street, right? Now, the WITSEC people told him to lie low in New Orleans until his identity documents were ready. Goodbye, Wayne Byerly. Hello, Wayne Baxter. He took classes in computer science and obtained his GED. He had trouble sleeping. At Florence, he tossed and turned, wondering when his luck would run out. He was no longer stuck in that abattoir, but the anxiety attacks continued. Night after night, when he did drift off, he had hyper-real nightmares about being stabbed. Sometimes it was Dustin Hunkin holding the knife. Sometimes it was Brad Leonard or someone else. He would wake up feeling clammy. A puddle of cold sweat collected at his sternum. The only thing that seemed to help was marijuana. He tested positive for the drug 9 times in less than 2 years. Violating the terms of his release, exasperating his parole officer, he went to these therapists and psychologists who told him he had post-traumatic stress disorder and was self-medicating. They suggested Prozac, Xanax, and other modern marvels, but nothing worked like weed. He continued infractions, and they didn't sit well with the judge who cut his sentence. He was removed from the WITSEC program, flown back to Phoenix, and spent 7 months cooling his heels in the Central Arizona Detention Center, expecting any day to cross paths with one of his old partners in crime. His attorney convinced another judge to take him out of harm's way. WITSEC took him back. Goodbye, Wayne Baxter. Hello, Wayne Bird. The marshals took him to find temporary lodging at a hotel in Albany. The front desk manager was a woman in her early 20s from a small town on the Canadian border. One morning, she saw the new guest get into an unmarked police car and figured he must be an undercover cop. She thought he was around 28 years old, or maybe 30. He was 42 by the time she learned the truth about him, his real name, and his crimes, and WITSEC. By that time, it didn't matter, because she was in love. The wedding was June 10th, 2006. He made me feel confident in love, Betsy Huey Byerly says. He was also the greatest gentleman I'd ever met. 3 months after the wedding, he completed his parole. Now, nobody could send him back to prison except him. The awful dreams and night sweats stopped. A few more months and the couple decided they had enough of the upstate New York winters. They moved to Phoenix with their newborn son. Climate wasn't the only reason for the move, of course. It had been almost 10 years since Byerly had buried the cash stuffed with coolers in the woods. He hadn't dared to retrieve them while he was under still federal supervision. His every move subject to scrutiny, but it was calling him now. This jackpot at the end of the trail. This payoff for all he'd risked and done to earn his freedom. I had to get near that money, he says. No two ways about it. Without going into details, he told Bessie he had something to do. From the old days to pick up. He left her and Owen, their toddler, at a tourist in the cabin in Strawberry and retraced his path to the stash. When the shovel scraped at the hard plastic roof of the first cooler, the impact sent an electric thrill through his arm. It's still here. He took the coolers back to the cabin. Bessie played with Owen in the grass behind the place while he brushed off the dirt and cat litter and inspected his treasure for signs of rot. Then he heard howls of pain outside. With typical bravado, Owen had started running downhill, his momentum carrying him forward. The slope ended abruptly with a sharp drop into a ditch. He had plunged into the abyss and hit his head on a rock. Bessie had lunged after him, trying to haul him in, and injured her leg. Trembling, Byerly picked up his shrieking son and put him in the car, returned for Betsy, and rushed them both to the ER in Payson, 18 miles away. There was no time to secure or even think about the heaps of money at the cabin. I left that $1 million on the floor, Byerly says. That's what it meant to me. Later, he says, after Owen was laughing at the bump on his head and the exams indicating nothing was broken, he went back to the cabin and collected the money. By Byerly's account, the cash dribbled out over the next few years in untraceable amounts, helping him build his new life and aid friends in need of help. He doesn't care if anyone believes him or not. If there's any official inquiry, he's prepared to say he made it all up. But that's not the thing about money. It's there, and then it's not. For Byerly, it was no longer important as it once was. For a long time, he was going the wrong way, says Lewis Morris, his younger sister. I am super proud of him and the way he's devoted himself to his family. He was trying to get his life together, and it was always met with a ton of skepticism, says his brother Billy Byerly. It took a while for me to figure out that the things he did were no reflection on our family. We all feel pretty good about where he's at today. He also reconciled with Steve Boyce. His former partner had managed to leave his past behind too, stepping into a steady work as an HVAC technician and an actor after his 2005 release. He took his chisel outlook look to Hollywood and has appeared in films, television shows, and commercials, usually as a tough biker or a bartender. Now, these are some of the highlights on his resume: Arrested Development, Reno 911, Hannah Montana, My Name is Earl, and a reoccurring role on Days of Our Lives. Returning to Idaho to help look after an ailing parent, he visited Byerly on several occasions, though the sting of his betrayal hasn't quite been forgotten. It still bothers me, Boyce says. Sure it does. I think he owes me. And if he hits it big, he knows I'm going to be there. And if I hit it big with all my acting and stuff, I'm going to hook him up. But there are no shortcuts in life. Byerly's dreams of hitting it big these days revolve around the music business. He put together a music studio behind his house where he works on songs that he's been writing for years. He's performed at open mic nights and songwriter showcases in the Boise area, sometimes prefacing a number by explaining that it was written while he was on the run, or while he was trying to do good in the worst place on earth. People tell him he has quite an imagination. When he's not playing music, he's driving a truck, hauling beats to a processing plant in a Caldwell, or spending time at home. He has his music and his family, his 2 boys and a girl now. By his own reckoning, he's a rich man. What I did in Florence makes me proud, he says. It's what brought me here to a life I've never dreamed of. Rowdynationtv. Hopefully you guys stayed around and you checked that story out. I know it was kind of long, kind of lengthy. Leave a comment and tell me how I did and let me know how I can improve. Like I said before, Rowdynationtv, click that like button, subscribe to the channel, Share the video. If you can't do all three of those, do one. It'll really help the channel out. Rowdy Nation TV, we out.